views expressed on this program are those of the hosts, guests, and callers, and are not necessarily those of this station, its management, or other advertisers. You're listening to Transformation Talk Radio.
Welcome to Lucid Planet Radio with Dr. Kelly Neff. This hit show will illuminate your senses and empower you beyond your daily stressors and hardships. Renowned psychologist and author Dr. Kelly will captivate you with far-reaching topics and amazing guests as you wake to the greatest version of yourself. Learn to tap into your intuitions, think critically about our world, heal emotional and psychological wounds, and follow your passions to live your dreams. Each week, you'll learn how to navigate the global shift of consciousness and explore the deeper knowledge within. Welcome home. Now here's your host, Dr. Kelly Neff.
Hello, everyone. I am Dr. Kelly, and you are listening to Lucid Planet Radio on Transformation Talk Radio and WBLQ 1230 AM, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and New York. Stay with us for the next hour and let us help you experience healing, creativity, and knowledge. Every week on Lucid Planet Radio, we will have some of the most gifted scientists, healers, speakers, and authors helping you to become the greatest version of yourself and live your dreams. You can find out more at thelucidplanet.com and stream all of our podcasts for free on lucidplanetradio.com, iTunes, and SoundCloud by just searching for Lucid Planet Radio. You can also connect with me on Facebook and Twitter at The Lucid Planet with Dr. Kelly. Now, here at Lucid Planet Radio, we are pleased to announce that we have recently been picked up by CRN Digital Talk Radio, bringing us to over 11 million homes in the U.S. and over 100 countries. Wow. This is a great time to jump in and become an advertiser, sponsor, or partner of the show. Just go to our website, thelucidplanet.com, or email me directly at drkellyneff@gmail.com. That's drkellyneff, N-E-F-F, @gmail.com. So much more to find out, so stay tuned for that. And today, we're having a very special show. Today is, of course, 4/20, or April the 20th, which, if you didn't know, is kind of recognized the world over as a day to celebrate cannabis or marijuana, thanks to what some might call urban legend or others might call cultural mythos. I've always wondered, where does the term 420 come from? Some say, for example, it's the police code for cannabis arrests. Some say it's the number of active chemicals in marijuana. Some say it's tea time in Holland, or it has something to do with Hitler's birthday, or it's the numbers multiplied from a Bob Dylan song. The point is that there's all kinds of speculation here, and nobody really knows for sure. But after doing a little bit of research myself, I found an interview on the Huffington Post claiming that the term 420 was coined back in 1971 by the Waldo brothers in San Rafael, California, who decided to meet at 420 in the afternoon after practice to go searching for a marijuana field that was allegedly left unattended. Now, of course, the question here is, how did this spread beyond just these brothers in San Rafael? Well, apparently, they had connections to the Grateful Dead. They had an uncle doing real estate for them, a younger brother who was a tour manager who was connected to them. And when someone would pass a joint around, they would say 420, and that began to spread through the community. And of course, as the counterculture movement of the late 60s and 70s kind of blew up, the term 420 came along for the ride, making it this cultural icon that it is today. And I mean, indeed, now on 420, there are worldwide legalization marches, gatherings, public cannabis use events at colleges and public parks. There's the High Times Cannabis Cup. There are Craigslist housing listings. They ask for 420 friendly roommates, and so on. So on this day, 420, celebration of Cannabis Day, I am very excited to welcome back one of my favorite guests on the show, Paul Armentano, who is the Deputy Director of NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. And we're going to be really continuing where we left off on our last interview, talking about the cutting-edge emerging research on the efficacy of cannabis, as well as brand new research on cannabis from driving, the 2016 election cycle, various state ballot measures, legalization efforts, and the best presidential candidates for cannabis. So please welcome Paul to the show. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, Kelly.
It's wonderful to have you on. Um, were you familiar about this whole story of 420, Paul?
I am familiar with it. I'm familiar with some of the rumors with regard to how 420 got started, and I'm also familiar with the notion that the actual foundation for the 420 slogan comes out of San Rafael. I do think it is notable on this day that we recognize that cannabis holds this unique cultural space in our society where we have days dedicated to its celebration and where the slang is now part of the American lexicon. This is really unique to cannabis. We don't have similar days, similar cultural affections, certainly for other illicit substances.
No, we do not.
We certainly
Do
do
not.
not. There is no day to celebrate the use of cocaine or the use of
No,
heroin or
no,
amphetamines. So again,
no.
it goes to show how cannabis, even if our federal laws do not separate cannabis away from these other illicit substances, a society in our culture truly does.
That's an excellent point. And in fact, there's even more. I mean, there's so many more cultural lexicons about cannabis. I live in Denver, and dabs and oil is really big. And last year in Denver, on 7/10, July 10th, it was 7/10 day. When you turn 7 to 10 upside down, it says oil. So that is now the dab day. And of course, I'm sure there's many more. But the point is, this is absolutely a unique and really magical thing almost that we become so accepting of cannabis, and certainly across America, more than the majority now live in states where it is legal for medical or recreational use. This is a trend that's not really going to stop, is it?
No, we even now see commercial marketers using 420 as a day to release their products, new record albums, the release of mainstream movies. That really shows a pivot and sort of a tipping point in our culture when mainstream commercial enterprises that typically shy away from controversy of any kind largely embrace 420. Well, you know our time has come.
That's awesome. Well, and speaking of our time, 2016 has the potential to be a very exciting year for cannabis, doesn't it?
Most certainly.
And what do you think are kind of some of the imminent trends or changes in laws or in states or in policies that people can potentially look forward to?
Well, at NORML, we have an entire section of our website at normal.org/act, ACT, that is dedicated to highlighting all of the significant marijuana-related reform legislation that is active in state legislatures around the country. And if people go to that page, they'll find dozens and dozens of bills
Yes.
that we are both tracking and oftentimes supporting. There's a handful of bills that and proposals that we're opposing as well. But generally, these fall into the category of legislation that either reduces or removes penalties on the possession of marijuana, or we're looking at legislation that seeks to expand access to medical marijuana for qualifying patients. And we see a number of states where those types of bills are moving forward. In Pennsylvania, there has been an ongoing debate for the last 2 years within the legislature to finally provide medical marijuana access. It certainly looks as if this is going to be the year where that legislation goes through. There's discussions going on legislatively in Kansas about reducing criminal penalties on the possession of marijuana and trying to provide medical marijuana for the first time to
Wow.
qualifying patients. There are a number of states like Vermont where they are actually trying to be the first state
Yes.
to legislatively enact regulations governing the adult use of marijuana. Rhode Island's discussing a very similar proposal.
It's a
So
huge
again,
deal.
anyone who goes to our website, norml.org/act, they can simply scroll, find their state, and very quickly find out what reforms are pending in their legislature.
Awesome. So definitely check that out again, guys. That's norml.org/act. About a minute or two left. I wanted to mention Vermont. This is a really big deal because it would be the first time, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it would be the first time that the legislature would legalize cannabis as opposed to the popular vote. Is that right?
That is correct. And in fact, Vermont is a state, like about half of U.S. states, where there is no state initiative written into the state law or to the state constitution. So in states like Vermont and Texas and a number of other states, the only type of legal changes they can only come from lawmakers. They can only come from the legislature. So this is the way legal reform must be done in many parts of the country. So it is pivotal to have lawmakers in one of these states become the first to move forward and act legislatively. We've definitely seen with medical marijuana and with other trends in marijuana law reform that when lawmakers act in one jurisdiction of the country, other lawmakers elsewhere in the country then soon follow.
Amazing. So we're potentially on the precipice of some major precedents being set. And on that note, you're listening to Lucid Planet Radio with Dr. Kelly, and we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we will explore more about the phenomenon of 420, cannabis legalization, reform, and the amazing body of research out there as presented by NORML and Paul Armentano. So stay tuned, and we will be right back.
Are you ready for a game changer? Sarah Westall is bringing you Business Game Changers Radio. Sarah brings you leading experts, visionaries, and newsmakers who provide the best commentary on big issues and cutting-edge innovations. Sarah's 20 years as a business executive will help you think like an entrepreneur with expertise, energy, and attitude. Tune in to Business Game Changers Mondays at noon Pacific, 3 Eastern on TransformationTalkRadio.com.
Hi, I'm Tim Darter.
And I'm Steve Kramer.
Join us on Spirit Fire Radio. Discover how to add the mechanics of meditation to your day.
And watch yourself connect in a whole new way. Find the amazing moments in life's routines that often pass us by. Add to your awareness with Spirit Fire Radio.
Tune in each Wednesday at 9 a.m. for your weekly guide to practical mindfulness. And to learn more, visit www.spiritfireradio.com.
Introducing the Lucid Planet, a digital gathering place featuring cutting-edge, high-vibrational content that will empower and inspire you to become the greatest version of yourself. Visit the Lucid Planet today to stimulate your mind, body, and soul as you connect with a global community of like-minded people. The Lucid Planet is edited by renowned psychologist and author Dr. Kelly Neff, who is here to help you cope with anxiety, connect to your higher purpose, uncover your true passions, and live your dreams. Dr. Kelly's fresh, compassionate perspective emphasizes growth, transformation, healing, and thriving. Even in the face of adversity, say goodbye to bad news and low vibrational media for good and become part of the larger collective of people working together to navigate the global shift of consciousness and transform the world from within. Join the planet, the Lucid Planet. Visit thelucidplanet.com. Welcome home.
we are back on Lucid Planet Radio with Dr. Kelly, and my guest today is Paul Armentano, who is talking with us about cannabis efficacy, legalization, 420, and more. Before we continue, I just want to make sure everybody knows how to contact you, Paul, to find out more about NORML and all of the research and to get involved.
Sure. NORML has a very comprehensive and detailed webpage that we update almost daily. That's at norml.org, NORML.org. There's a daily blog. I tend to blog, again, almost daily, and typically I focus on the emerging science and the emerging research, as well as some of the breaking political news and political developments. So people can stay up to date by going to the NORML website. We also have a Facebook page that has updated multiple times throughout each day. So if people go to facebook.com/normal, they can find us there. And again, I mentioned the ACT page earlier, which is the section of our website dedicated to political activity, those individuals who want to get involved with lobbying on behalf of marijuana law reform in their state, and also if they want to be in contact with or advocate on behalf of their federal lawmakers, they can do so from that page.
Excellent. So really the NORML website, which is just norml.org, has all of the information you need, or at least is a fantastic place to start.
Exactly.
Wonderful. Well, on this 420 of 2016, of course, this is an election year. There's huge presidential election happening, tons of political stuff. I don't get too into it, but I do want to ask you, Paul, who, in your opinion, is the best presidential candidate for cannabis?
That's a difficult question because there are so many limitations with regard to how the president can act on these sort of domestic policies. In reality, cannabis law reform at the federal level really needs to come from Congress itself. And by and large, the majority of Congress has failed to take a strong stance with regard to marijuana law reform, and that has been the case historically. There are theoretically executive actions a president could take. For instance, the president could demand the U.S. Attorney General to reschedule cannabis, but in many ways that isn't realistic. It's never happened before with regard to any drug, and it's hard to believe it's going to happen in the near future. A president can set the tone for how this issue is debated. Certainly the Obama administration at times has sent mixed signals, but in recent years has clearly sent a signal to U.S. attorneys to largely not get involved in state affairs as they pertain to marijuana regulation and distribution. Certainly there's the possibility that a new administration could come in and not abide by that position, and certainly they would not in any way be legally bound to do so. A new administration could have take an entirely different stance on this issue. One could appoint a U.S. Attorney General who takes an entirely different stance on this issue. So in that respect, the president possesses some level of power, but ultimately reform at the federal level, whether it's banking reform, whether it's the scheduling of cannabis, whether it is permitting greater access to medical marijuana research, those changes largely reside in the hands of Congress. In some cases, there could be regulatory reforms in particular agencies like the National Institutes of Health that could play a role. But ultimately, the president himself or herself is not the one who is going to legalize cannabis. Ultimately, this is still an issue that is largely won and lost at the state level and ultimately will be won at the congressional level.
Wow. Thank you for such an excellent depiction of what's going on in Washington. It's kind of oversimplified. So and so's president, they're going to legalize this. And, you're right, it's much more complicated. So, really, we have to be looking at our representatives that we're voting for as well.
Most certainly. I mean, so many of the marijuana law reforms that advocates talk about, whether it's rescheduling cannabis or removing cannabis from the Federal Controlled Substances Act altogether, or permitting veterans to have access to medical cannabis, or allowing banking and financial institutions to engage in relationships with state licensed marijuana businesses. There's legislation pending before Congress to achieve all of these goals. Yet those bills are not heard in committee. They are not called by House or Senate leadership for votes. They are not discussed on the floor of the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate. All of those things can happen if congressional leadership makes them a political priority, but they have never done so. And at this time, there really isn't ample political pressure put on those folks by their constituency to take a different position.
And so, really, it's up to the people to demand some level of action, both at the state level and, I mean, we're seeing massive changes at the state level, but it hasn't translated into anything really at the federal level at all. And of course, the issues that you mentioned, giving veterans safe access, the banking system, I mean, that's a huge one. Here in Colorado, they're paying the IRS their taxes with armored trucks full of money, and a 10% surcharge because they're paying their IRS bills in cash. And the whole thing seems completely illogical and doesn't make sense.
It is illogical. And the irony is when you go to Capitol Hill, you will see finger pointing from members of Congress to the Attorney General, to the President, and they all point fingers at one another. They all acknowledge publicly it is illogical. They all acknowledge it needs to be changed. And then they all point to someone else as the entity who needs to change it.
Sounds like politics to me.
Yes, buck passing at its finest.
Yeah, eventually we'll have to stop. I'm curious what you think about, I know Hillary Clinton came out and said that if elected president, she would advise that cannabis be rescheduled from Schedule 1, the most restrictive, which it is right now, to Schedule 2, which would allow for more access and kind of like research abilities. What do you think about that?
Well, that's what Hillary Clinton claims rescheduling marijuana from Schedule 1 to Schedule 2 would do. I'm not convinced that, in fact, is the case. So the way the Federal Controlled Substances Act works is that virtually all illicit and licit substances are placed into one of 5 categories, Schedule 1 through 5, Schedule 1 being the most restrictive, Schedule 5 being the least restrictive. Now, interestingly, alcohol and tobacco are unscheduled. They are not classified in Schedule 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. And we at NORML argue that marijuana ought not to be scheduled either, that it, in fact, does not fit the very specific definitions of Schedule 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 drugs. Now, a Schedule 1 drug, by definition, is mandated to meet 3 criteria. It must possess the highest potential of abuse of any kind of illicit substance or any family of illicit drug. It must possess no accepted medical utility in the United States. Think about that. We have 23 states in the District of Columbia that by statute allow for physicians to recommend cannabis therapy to qualified patients. But under federal law, there is a belief that cannabis possesses no accepted medical utility, which flies in the face of our current reality. And the third criteria is that cannabis lacks accepted safety to be administered under controlled conditions. So in other words, they're saying marijuana is so dangerous that even if a physician in a hospital wanted to administer cannabis, he or she would not in good faith be able to do so because the risk to the patient would be so great. Now, a poll literally just came out that found that 83% of the country believe that this is ridiculous. They believe that marijuana does not meet the criteria of a Schedule 1 drug.
Wow. I'm curious about the other 17%.
Yeah, I was actually surprised 17% did.
Right.
That 17% may consist of our members of Congress.
There you go. I have to, Paul, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to continue this discussion and talk about all of the research that actually does exist, kind of proving that the way cannabis is scheduled in the Controlled Substances Act is wrong. So I'm Dr. Kelly. You're listening to Lucid Planet Radio, and I will be right back with Paul Armentano. Stay tuned.
Awaken to your radiant, authentic self. For over 15 years, Soul Purpose advocate Nancy Monson has been focused on leading change in the lives of those looking to live their true purpose. She is devoted to supporting people in living a soul-directed life every day. Let Nancy help you overcome fear, worry, and doubt. Visit everydayspirituality.com to learn how Nancy can be your Soul Purpose advocate.
Tune in to The Jen Royster Show, intuitive guidance to inspire your life, each Thursday at 8 a.m. Pacific and 11 a.m. Eastern on TransformationTalkRadio.com. This amazing show is an inspirational hour that will take you on an epic metaphysical journey to discover the spiritual approach to life's greatest challenges. Dr. Jen is an internationally known intuitive counselor, spiritual teacher, and energy healer. Call in for intuitive readings and visit JenRoyster.com for more information.
There are so many resources out there for meditation. But did you know that Atana's Heart Earth Healing Meditation is available for you for free? Yes, that's right. You can receive this free healing meditation today from Atana Badili. All you need to do is visit his website, atanamethod.com. That's ATAANA method.com and sign up. You will receive your free meditation instantly. That's atanamethod.com.
Are you ready for a game changer? Sarah Westall is bringing you Business Game Changers Radio. Sarah brings you leading experts, visionaries, and newsmakers who provide the best commentary on big issues and cutting-edge innovations. Sarah's 20 years as a business executive will help you think like an entrepreneur with expertise, energy, and attitude. Tune in to Business Game Changers Mondays at noon Pacific, 3 Eastern on TransformationTalkRadio.com.
We are back on Lucid Planet Radio with Dr. Kelly, and I am here with Paul Armentano, Deputy Director of NORML, talking about cannabis policy, research, and efficacy. Paul, we just left off at the break talking about the Controlled Substances Act and talking about Hillary Clinton's assertions that she would move cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 2, and I'd just like to continue on where we left off.
Sure. So the difference between a Schedule 1 drug and a Schedule 2 drug, the criteria actually are not particularly different. A Schedule 1 drug, as I said earlier, is considered to have a high potential for abuse, it lacks accepted safety, and it lacks accepted medical utility. Schedule 2 drugs are also believed to have fairly high potential for abuse, tend to have risks associated with their use, but there's an acknowledgement that they do possess some level of medical efficacy. So, for instance, cocaine is a Schedule 2 drug. Methamphetamine is a Schedule 2 drug. I don't believe that a majority of the public and individuals who are really familiar with cannabis and its safety profile would suggest that we regulate cannabis the way we regulate cocaine or the way we regulate methamphetamine. That would still be an inappropriate placement for cannabis, and it would show a lack of understanding of both the broad range of its efficacy and its unique safety profile. In addition, Ms. Clinton contends that by moving marijuana from Schedule 1 to Schedule 2, we will be allowed to better study the health impact of cannabis. And again, this shows a real misunderstanding of the regulations that are in place currently, because while, yes, it is more difficult to conduct clinical trials on a Schedule 1 controlled substance than, say, a Schedule 2 or a Schedule 3 controlled substance, what she fails to recognize is that there are unique regulatory hurdles in place that only apply to cannabis, that do not apply to other Schedule 1 drugs. So even by rescheduling marijuana from Schedule 1 to Schedule 2, those regulatory hurdles would continue to be in place. For instance, cannabis is the only illicit substance for which one must acquire the drug from the federal government. That does not change if marijuana is Schedule 2, and that remains one of the biggest hurdles and detriments for scientists to do clinical research, is they know they have to use the federal government's marijuana supply source, which sometimes tends to be very limited. It tends to be hard to obtain. And for many researchers who want to study the actual real-world effects of the cannabis that is being used today and utilized today by patient populations, by social use populations, they're not using the federal government's marijuana grown at the University of Mississippi. They're using the marijuana that's domestically cultivated in their states. And under federal law, no researcher can conduct a clinical trial using that marijuana. It has to come from the University of Mississippi, and that's not a scheduling issue. That is a regulatory issue.
Wow, I didn't know that. So, yeah, that makes things complicated. And yet there's still so much research about cannabis.
Exactly. And that's what I found so disappointing when Hillary Clinton first rolled out this proposal. She was at a campaign stop in South Carolina, and she argued, we need to reschedule marijuana so we can finally learn about marijuana. The implication is that we don't know enough about marijuana right now to revisit amending marijuana policy. And in fact, that's absurd. The reason groups like NORML argue for regulating marijuana and for providing marijuana for therapeutic access is because we have the actual data. We have the scientific evidence already that justifies making those changes in policy.
Yes, and in our past show, we talked about this, how there's literally thousands and thousands of studies. Like when you search for marijuana on PubMed or cannabis on PubMed, there's thousands of studies compared to the number of studies on topics that cannabis or marijuana would replace, like Advil or Tylenol or opioids. There's so much more research on marijuana.
Yes, there's really two facets to this discussion. One is the fact that you are correct. We have more actual clinical and preclinical and observational research specific to the use or the administration of cannabis than we have for this litany of synthetic pharmaceutical products that cannabis could potentially replace. As you said, if you go on PubMed today and you typed in marijuana, you would find over 23,000 peer-reviewed papers referencing cannabis in some way. If you were to type in, for instance, Adderall, you would get fewer than 300 published papers, just to give you a quick comparison. But the other facet of this question that's so important to recognize is that unlike the majority, if not all, of pharmaceutical drugs, cannabis has a 1,000-year history of human use, giving us a very unique perspective with regard to what the long-term effects and impact is of the use of this substance in Western societies. And again, this is a really unique perspective. Look at the family of drugs, the anti-high cholesterol drugs like statin drugs, like Crestor. Who knows what the long-term effects of Crestor are? And I highlight Crestor because this is a drug that once it's prescribed to somebody, they're arguably going to be taking every day for the rest of their life to control their cholesterol. Who knows what the long-term ramifications of the use of this drug are? Nobody knows, because there's not a single human being on this planet that has ever used these family of drugs daily for 25 years, for 30 years, for 40 years. So we are really at a loss when it comes to understanding the long-term effects of so many of the drugs people take every day. We don't have that issue with cannabis because, again, civilizations have been taking this substance for thousands of years. So we have this sort of empirical data as well that we don't have for so many other substances.
It's amazing. And I think you're absolutely right. I mean, there's so much documented evidence. There's graves and tombs with bodies 3,000 years old with cannabis buried with them, you know? And
Exactly. And ironically enough, the same reason societies thousands of years ago were using cannabis, they were doing it for medicinal purposes, for divinity purposes, for recreational purposes, in some cases for nutritional purposes with things like hemp seed. Those are the same reasons that populations today continue to use cannabis.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we're finding now is incredible as far as the depth and breadth of how effective this medicine truly is. I'd love for you to comment on that, maybe with some examples of recent findings.
Sure. Well, there's a number of studies that have come out in recent weeks that I think are of particular significance. Two studies in particular came out of Israel. Both of these are observational studies, which means there was not a placebo group, that everybody in the study was using cannabis. Now, they were using a standardized form of cannabis, and they were being evaluated over time, over the length of the study, but their progress was not necessarily compared to placebo. So that's why we call it an observational study, not a placebo-controlled study. The first study had to do with the use of cannabis for individuals suffering from chronic pain. And in this particular study, subjects in the study had treatment-resistant chronic pain, which means they were not responsive to conventional analgesic medicines. They used relatively small daily doses of cannabis, about 20 grams or less per day, and they inhaled cannabis for a period of at least 7 months over the course of the study. And what researchers found was at the end of the study, these individuals who had not responded, they had not found pain relief from conventional analgesic medications, they did experience significant mitigation of pain by using cannabis, but perhaps even more impressively, their use, the cohort's overall use of opiates fell by roughly 50%. Wow. Over the course of this study. And there were many individuals or subjects in the study who by the end of the study were no longer using opioids at all. That's a really important finding, given much of the narrative that's now taking place in this country with concern to the overprescription and or abuse of opioids in the treatment of chronic pain.
Absolutely. I mean, opioids are the biggest killer. When we look at the drug deaths, the CDC, I think, reports like 17,000 deaths, and the majority are opioids. It's kind of shocking. And yet we're giving these away like candy, and cannabis is on the Schedule 1. Anyway, we've got like a minute left. Could you bring up, are there other studies showing this opioid use mitigation?
Yes, in fact, there are a pair of studies. One was published a couple of years ago in the Journal of the American Medical Association, finding that in jurisdictions of this country where patients have access to cannabis therapy, as recommended by a physician, we see lower rates of opioid abuse, and most significantly, we see lower rates of opioid-induced deaths. In fact, one of these two studies found about a 25% reduction year by year in opioid-related deaths in states that allow for medical cannabis use.
That's incredible. And that finding alone, I think it's just stunning. And it's really, really important that our lawmakers see that and understand how much that matters for people's lives. This is huge. We're going to take a quick break, and when we return, we're going to wrap up the show with Paul Armentano, Deputy Director of NORML, on this glorious 420 by talking about some of the other really interesting research coming out with regards to epilepsy, driving on cannabis, and more. So stay tuned, and we will be right back.
What if we really didn't have to die to go to heaven? Are you curious about the afterlife or rebirth? The highly anticipated new book from author Dr. Susan Allison, You Don't Have to Die to Go to Heaven, is available now. Find out how to find guidance and healing in the spirit realms. Order the book today and put it on your must-read list for 2016. Visit drsusanallison.com to learn more.
Get into it for 2016. Do you want more prosperity, clarity, energy, and balance in your life? Join Lynn Brown now through March for one of her amazing workshops, each focusing on a key part of living your best life. For more information and to register for one of these amazing workshops, visit lynnbrownevent.com. That's lynnbrownevent.com. And get into it this 2016 with Lynn Brown.
Introducing the Lucid Planet, a digital gathering place featuring cutting-edge, high-vibrational content that will empower and inspire you to become the greatest version of yourself. Visit the Lucid Planet today to stimulate your mind, body, and soul as you connect with a global community of like-minded people. The Lucid Planet is edited by renowned psychologist and author Dr. Kelly Neff, who is here to help you cope with anxiety, connect to your higher purpose, uncover your true passions, and live your dreams. Dr. Kelly's fresh, compassionate perspective emphasizes growth, transformation, healing, and thriving. Even in the face of adversity, say goodbye to bad news and low vibrational media for good and become part of the larger collective of people working together to navigate the global shift of consciousness and transform the world from within. Join the planet, the Lucid Planet. Visit thelucidplanet.com. Welcome home.
This is Lucid Planet Radio with Dr. Kelly, and I am here with Paul Armentano discussing all things cannabis. Happy 420, global cannabis holiday. We are going to wrap up the show by talking about some of the most interesting cutting-edge research coming out right now with regards to cannabis and cannabis efficacy. So, Paul, one thing I thought we should definitely bring up is the new epilepsy research that just came out.
Sure. This is really important because for years, anecdotal reports of cannabis, and in particular cannabis that was high in the component CBD, having the ability to reduce seizures, particularly in young children with severe forms of epilepsy. This was driving a narrative across this country, and in some places it actually led to changes in state laws to try and permit parents to have access to this drug to provide to their children. But we really didn't have any hard data beyond these anecdotes. And now we do. We've seen a rash of clinical findings come out of Israel and come out of this country looking at the administration of either strains of cannabis high in CBD or in some cases extracts taken from cannabis that are dominant in CBD, and seeing how the administration of these components impact children, again, with intractable epilepsy. The worst of the worst were the ones who were in these studies. We recently saw a study come out of Israel that looked at a number of pediatric patients, and what they found was after treatment, there was 89% of the cohort experienced some level of reduction in seizure mitigation.
Wow.
Again, these were subjects who were treatment resistant. So with conventional drugs, there was a 0% reduction in mitigation, and then we see quite successful results associated with the administration of CBD-dominant strains of cannabis. There were a number of U.S.-based trials, again, looking largely at pediatric epilepsy patients, again, those that were unresponsive to conventional treatments, and we see when they are administered extracts containing cannabidiol, we saw very similar percentage results in seizure mitigation, and it is arguably quite likely that at some point in the near future, the FDA is probably going to sign off on some sort of proprietary formula of cannabidiol, whether it's a plant extract or a synthetic. But it's really hard to believe that regulators and lawmakers are going to turn a blind eye to this sort of clinical data.
Absolutely. It's very hard to ignore. And I think it's so fascinating how cannabis can address these treatment-resistant conditions. It's fascinating. I also wanted to bring up, as we're wrapping up the show, something that the regulators are not turning a blind eye to, which is the idea of kind of driving under the influence of cannabis. And I know here in Colorado, where cannabis is legal, there's been a lot of controversy over people who are being told they're too intoxicated on marijuana to drive. A lot of these cases are being dismissed in court. Again, like I said, there's very much a gray area, but there's some research coming out kind of dictating what it really is like to be driving under the influence. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. Well, this is another one of those subjects where oftentimes I get frustrated because I hear individuals on both sides of the argument say that there just isn't enough data, that the data just has never been collected or conducted, when in reality, we have a laundry list of studies assessing how marijuana impacts psychomotor skills, going back to a series of actual on-road driving studies that were paid for and conducted by the U.S. federal government, by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, going back in the early 1990s. They gave people marijuana and put them out in actual traffic in the real world and assessed how they drove. So
no one talks about it, huh?
No one talks about it. NHTSA doesn't talk about it, and they did the studies. So typically when you hear the argument that we have mixed findings or we don't have enough information, what that means is the question has been asked, it's been studied, and the federal government didn't like the answer that they got.
Yeah.
And that's certainly been the case with driving. Now, there's been a couple really interesting studies that have come out recently specific to driving. One was a driving simulator study that was done at the University of Iowa, where individuals were given either marijuana, alcohol, or placebo, and researchers measured how these individuals drove versus their baseline performance. And not particularly surprisingly, because this finding was consistent with other available research, what we found is that when individuals consumed marijuana shortly before driving, they tend to perform in a compensatory manner. So they reduced their speed, they made fewer lane changes, they left greater distance between their vehicle and the vehicle in front of them. In other words, they drove in a more cautious manner. They appeared to be aware that they were impaired and they were trying to compensate for it accordingly. By contrast, the individuals who drove alcohol drove in a more reckless manner. In particular, they overall would increase their speed. And again, those are findings that are consistent with previous findings. Now, what's really important is not so much acknowledging how marijuana use may change performance, but evaluating to how significant is this change in performance in elevating one's risk of motor vehicle accident. And this is where context really needs to come in, because you'll hear over and over again that marijuana may increase one's risk of accident. And there's data indicating, in fact, that that's true. But on the spectrum of risks, or the spectrum of behaviors or activities that we know increase motor vehicle accident, cannabis appears to be on the very low end of that spectrum. So there was a literature review that was published just recently where reviewers looked at all of the crash culpability data that's been collected on marijuana and driving over the last 3 decades. And after they adjusted these studies to control for potential confounding variables, like the fact that most individuals that use marijuana also happen to be young males, what they found was the odds ratios, the elevated risk that a THC-positive driver would be engaged in a motor vehicle accident as compared to a similar driver who is drug-free was about 1.3, or about 30%. To put that number or that percentage in perspective, individuals who drive with 2 or more vehicles in the car have an increased odds ratio of accident of 2.2, or about 220%.
Wow.
Simply being pregnant and driving a motor vehicle increases one's risk of accident by 50%. Texting while driving has an increased odds ratio of 6, or 600%. Driving with legal amounts of alcohol in one's system increases one's odds of an accident 4-fold, or 400%. Again, to give you some context, it doesn't mean that marijuana makes one a safer driver, but in the context of risk, we're talking about a very nominal risk. In fact, another behavior that we see associated with about a 30% risk of accident is being a driver who is taking penicillin.
So we have like only a minute or 2 left. It goes by so fast. But I want to ask your opinion. Do you think that in terms of policy, do you think it's really appropriate then to give people DWIs if they test positive for THC or cannabis in their blood?
Well, again, the data is very clear on this. NHTSA is very clear on this. They have asked this question and answered it numerous times. And what they say consistently, and to their credit, what they say on their website is that it is inadvisable to try and predict recency of marijuana use or marijuana-induced impairment based on the presence of THC in the blood. And there's a long scientific explanation I can give you as to why they come to that conclusion, but the bottom line is marijuana is not like alcohol in this regard. It's very different, and we cannot conflate the presence of THC with the inference that one is impaired by THC.
Excellent. And my closing thought really for today is that there are many areas in which they try, or our government or lawmakers try to equate cannabis and alcohol. It could not be more different. And it's important to keep that in mind. And on that note, I want to thank my guest today, Paul Armentano, Deputy Director of NORML. Thank you so much, Paul, for coming on the show. I love having you on. It's really great.
Always fun, Kelly, and I look forward to coming back.
Absolutely. I'd love to have you back again in the fall. Thank you so much for sharing such great information, and really thank all of the listeners for tuning in to Lucid Planet Radio with Dr. Kelly. I have a great time, especially today celebrating 420. You can join me every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Central, 3 p.m. Mountain, and 2 p.m. Pacific. Find out more about the show at thelucidplanet.com and lucidplanetradio.com, and find me on Facebook and Twitter at The Lucid Planet with Dr. Kelly. You can also listen to all of our podcasts for free on iTunes, SoundCloud, and on lucidplanetradio.com. Next week, I am thrilled to be welcoming psychiatrist Dr. Gabor Mate to the show to discuss addiction, wellness, and what it means to be well-adjusted in a toxic world. So stay tuned for that. Light and love, and happy 420. Take care. Bye.
You've been listening to the hit show, Lucid Planet Radio, with renowned psychologist and author, Dr. Kelly Neff. Tune in each week as we illuminate your senses and empower you beyond your daily stressors and hardships. This hit show will captivate you with far-reaching topics and amazing guests as you wake up to the greatest version of yourself. Learn how to navigate the global shift of consciousness as you explore the deeper knowledge, passion, and purpose within. Visit lucidplanetradio.com for upcoming show topics and to contact Dr. Kelly.